Hello everyone, and thank you for taking time to watch this video about how we can learn effectively and do things that will help us prepare as best as we can for the upcoming exams. My name is Mr. Turrell, and at the school I teach business and enterprise. I also lead all in-school teacher development, so understanding how we all learn is a real passion of mine. In this video I'd like to share with you parts of how we work to help our students, your son or daughter, learn effectively. You may well have watched a similar video to this, which was shared with parents in Year 7. Much of the content will be the same, and that's no bad thing because repetition really is the key to learning successfully. So let's begin by taking a look at this. It's called Ebbinghaus's curve of forgetting, something you may well have some recollection of from previous talks and videos. Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist from the early 20th century, discovered that up to 90% of what we absorb we'll forget within a month, and that from the moment we are made aware of something we are likely to begin to forget it. As you can see from the graph, Ebbinghaus found that repetition of learning and spacing out this repetition of learning can have significant impact on what we can retain and for how long. This understanding forms the basis for many of our teaching strategies we now use. It's important to note that no scientific studies since have shown that this is not the case. This fundamental idea from psychology has meant that cognitive science, the study of the mind, now plays a key part in our understanding and approach to learning. A second key point is that our memory has two distinct parts: the long-term memory, where we store information, and the working memory, our ability to recall information and use it now. This is important because crucially the working memory is very limited. If we overload our working memory, too many ideas at once or too many tasks or bits of information to process at a time, our working memory cannot cope. Whatever we're doing is likely to have little to no positive impact on our long-term memory and our ability to recall at a later date, what we call learning. As teachers, we want every child to learn as much as they possibly can, so our goal is to move as much to our long-term memory as possible. What I'll be sharing with you in this video are some key strategies that can help us remember, crucial as we approach the exam season. Teachers in school will regularly talk about these strategies in their lessons. They will plan their lessons with this very much in mind, and what's just as important is that we share this understanding with our students and parents so that effort and time dedicated to revision and preparing for the exam is applied correctly. So here's my top 3 tips to helping you help your son or daughter learn effectively during this revision period. Number 1, retrieve rather than reread. Number 2, spaced practice and interleave. So that means little and often revision. And number 3, elaborate where you can. I'm going to begin with the most important element of learning, and that is practice. We call it retrieval practice. Recall that Ebbinghaus' curve of forgetting identifies that the more we practice, the greater our chance of securing this learning in our long-term memory. Once it's there, and if we regularly look to recall it, it'll become easy for us. It'll be stored in our long-term memories. Take an example of learning your times tables. If you've learned your times tables, it frees up space in your working memory as you approach other more challenging topics, say for example multiplying fractions. I can focus on the process steps of multiplying the fraction whilst not having to worry about what 5 times 4 is because I've learned my times tables. It's automatic. The idea of repeated practice can be seen when we drive too. The processes have become automatic. The many aspects and things we need to do, changing gear, using the indicator at the same time as reducing speed and using a brake, they've become automatic because we've practiced. We've over-practiced as such. Therefore, retrieval practice, the idea of retrieving from our mind on a regular basis, something we have covered in class, is absolutely crucial. What's really important to note here is that this retrieval practice needs to make you think. Daniel Willingham, psychologist and researcher of cognitive psychology and neuroscience, famously wrote, "Memory is the residue of thought. If we don't have to think, then we won't be learning. If you're not having to think as you practice, then the actual practice is not going to be having the desired effect, securing that learning in our long-term memory. Thinking about something isn't particularly pleasant. It doesn't feel particularly nice, and quite often will feel like hard work. It is difficult. Just like an athlete who wants to get faster or stronger, the training for that isn't particularly nice. They have to push themselves and take themselves out of their comfort zone. And the same can be said of learning. So don't accept your son or daughter just rewriting their notes, copying them out. They need to create a challenge. They need to make it difficult for themselves. Recalling from memory first is much better than rereading. Take a moment to read some of the activities you can do to help promote retrieval practice that you could support your child with. Ask them if they've done any of these. So some ideas. Ask your son or daughter whether they quiz themselves on a topic. Do they have flashcards, crosswords, match-up tasks that they can use? Can they set a time limit of say 3 minutes on a blank piece of paper and recall everything they can from that lesson or topic? Mind maps are great, but they only really work at the time of thinking. We don't just want to be rereading over them. If we want to strengthen that memory, it's really important that we have to think when we're practicing. Clearly there'll be things that they can't remember, and at that point they need to refer back to their notes, refer back to any materials they have, but remember to do this after the thinking part. They can then fill in any gaps. Help your son or daughter by taking their workbook and quizzing them on what they've learnt from a topic, from a lesson, from a day. I realise this may be a challenge. Getting much from your teenage son or daughter about school can be a challenge, but please persevere because it will help. Literally any activity where they're having to recall and think is great. The idea of just rereading your notes and highlighting keywords might look good and feel good, but the scientific evidence suggests that it will have minimal impact on your learning. Therefore, the idea of retrieve instead of reread should always be at the forefront of our minds when we're trying to learn effectively. So number one tip, lots of practice that makes you think is crucial. But there are other ways to support this memory process and the idea of learning too. So let's take a look. Number two in my top 3 tips for learning effectively is to space out your practice and mix it up. We call this spacing and interleaving. Essentially, it's more effective to space out your retrieval practice and to keep coming back to it than it is to lump it all together at once and then leave it for some time. Little and often is more effective than cramming or blocking something. It may initially seem counterproductive. New material may take longer to be seen, but the actual learning and your memory of it will be stronger. With just a few weeks until the exam season begins, it's really important that this starts now if it hasn't already. Late night cramming before an exam may help a tiny bit, but it's a much better use of your time and your well-being to be spacing out the practice. The idea of interleaving is also beneficial as well. For example, studying science by splitting an hour into 3 20-minute blocks, 20 minutes for biology, physics, and another 20 for chemistry, can be a lot more beneficial than 1 hour just on one topic. Many experiments have shown spacing out and interleaving your study, so mixing it up over a longer period, is more beneficial in the longer term compared to blocking your study. Initially, you may feel like it's more difficult. It's harder, but these desirable difficulties will produce better results, a better long-term outcome. And in this sense, fingers crossed, a better exam result. So key things to do. Switch between your topics as you revisit and study them at home and space out this learning. Little and often is key. Make sure you have a revision timetable and make sure you stick to it. And my third top tip for learning effectively is to elaborate wherever possible. Again, this makes you have to think, but here we want you to think a little deeper, a little harder. And there are a few ways to do this. First up, multiple choice questions. Many children will be familiar with multiple choice questions in their subjects. These are great ways to test what's been learned, but now we can use them to push ourselves a little further by adding a second column, like that shown here. Asking questions like, why is this the case, or why does it happen in this way, challenges us and makes us think further and deeper, which is exactly what we should be doing as part of our revision. And another way to elaborate and to make us think more is something called dual coding, the idea that 2 is better than 1. To dispel a myth about how we learn effectively, this is not learning styles. There is no evidence to suggest that we learn more effectively if we present information to people in their preferred learning style, whether that be visual, auditory or kinesthetic. However, what there is evidence to support is the idea of 2 means of being presented with information is better than 1, hence the dual. So you could combine words and visuals. You could look at your work and find visuals, find pictures that can help support the work and compare them to words. You can look at visuals and explain them in your own words. And you can take information you're trying to learn and draw visuals to go along with it. So if we're presenting material, a picture or a diagram can really support our learning. It's important to know that it shouldn't detract from the key learning message, and it most definitely shouldn't eat into a big chunk of your time that you've dedicated to learning or revisiting a topic by creating or searching for images. However, they can play a really useful way in helping us remember. The old adage, a picture speaks 1,000 words, really does have a place here in helping us learn effectively. So it may be that as part of your retrieval practice you try to draw a visual representation or answer parts of a diagram. An infographic or a visual timeline can be a really good way of helping you remember. So there you have it, my top 3 tips to help your child with their learning and revision. Retrieve rather than just rereading, space out the practice and interleave the topics, mix them up and stick to the revision plan, and elaborate wherever possible to stretch yourself whenever you can. Finally, I'll leave you with this quote from 17th century author Thomas Fuller, who said, "All things are difficult before they are easy." There will be tough times in this revision period, but the key to all success is hard work. Hard work, dedication, and commitment. Hopefully these few top tips can help you support your son or daughter in these upcoming exams. Thanks for watching, and should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch.